Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com for another front-end build for that Express Mongo API, except this time I'm going to be using just native web components. So I'm not going to be using some sort of web component library like Stencil.js or Lit Element or Amponent, which is one that I created. Instead, what I'm going to do is just use the native web component API from scratch to build the application. Okay, so what I'm going to do is first run the server, so for the API. So npm run dev, and then what we're going to do is go back to our other terminal here, and I'm going to do an npm init vitae. We'll just call this native web component to-dos. I'm going to use plain vanilla JS. Okay, so there is native web components. Where is it? Here it is. So let me just cd into that folder, cd into native, do an npm install, so that we can install the vitae libraries and other dependencies, and then do npm run dev. Okay, so now we have it here in localhost 3000. Okay. And essentially, wait, no, wrong project. Native web component to-dos. Essentially, this is all happening inside this main.js, which we'll leave that there for a second. We'll come back to, I'm going to create a folder called components, new folder, components, and it's going to be 3 components that I want. New file, what do you think here? It's going to be app.js, new file. Actually, I'm going to create a state.js because, well, technically I'm not going to do pure encapsulation. I'm not going to purely encapsulate my state into these components. Again, you'll see that I have created like base classes from the HTML element class that does the encapsulation a lot better. I created several libraries, but the newest one called Amponent would be sort of we'll do a separate build on that. That'll kind of show you like, hey, if I were to create sort of a way of working with web components that sort of encapsulates everything, how would that look like? I mean, technically that's what Stencil.js is. That's what Lit Element is. I think that's what Riot.js is doing under the hood. So essentially, there's a lot of approaches to this whole like, hey, how about we just use the native web component API? So let's see here, app state, new file. And what I'm going to do is, here's what I'm going to do. First, let's create the state. Okay, so we're just going to say export default and object. Okay, and let's just think about what kind of state I want. Right now I want to-dos, which will be an empty array. And again, if you see me do some of these builds, you kind of have a decent idea of what state I'm going to have anyways. So show form, false, reminder, empty string. Okay, reminder, empty string, reminder, completed, false, underscore ID, empty string. We also have our methods here. Okay. Get to-dos. We'll also have a reset state function here. Reset. Actually, I'd rather do it this way. Reset function. And all this is going to do is just reset these particular properties. Okay. let's actually just do this way. This dot. And then right here, where we have these colons, this should all become like that. And let's get rid of all these commas. Okay, that's all that function's going to do. Reset that when that's needed to be reset. Okay. So essentially I'm going to house all my state and all my functional, all the logic for my state in this object, which I'll just then pass around to the different components, and the other components can then use them as they need to. Cool. So I'm not necessarily creating anything particularly reusable here. Cool. Let's just also make our get to dos. Get to dos. Okay, and that's going to be an async function. And I want to want a URL property http://localhost 10,000/todos. Okay, and then once I set this up, then we can start building our first component. Okay, get to dos, and then in this one's going to just be const response equals fetch this.url, const data equals response.json, response.json, and then const, and then we just say this dot to dos equals data. Okay. And then I still don't want to call this dot reset whenever we do that, because that's generally when I want to reset the state. Which then reminds me, I also want a property called action that defaults as create. Okay. And that is going to also get reset. This dot action equals create. Okay, cool. So that's nice. Okay, so let's build our app component. And I'm going to import the state. So each of these components are going to have the state imported in them. Import state from ./state.js. Then we're going to declare a class. This is how you create a web component. Declare a class app app from HTML element, or not from HTML element, extends HTML element. And then what we do is we define our custom elements dot define, and then we say we want to create a tag called my app, and we will say app. Okay. And let's just kind of get it set up with the basics. Constructor, constructor, and we're going to attach a shadow DOM. So this dot attach shadow. This attaches the shadow DOM, which takes in an object which has a property of mode that'll be open. Just allows us to see it inside the elements tab. And then this, so basically a shadow has its own shadow root. So this dot shadow root equals, or this dot shadow root dot inner HTML is going to equal and we'll say it's an H1 that says hello. So we'll start with that. Okie dokie. So that is there. Save. Okay. And so now I can go back and then change main.js and say, hey, where there is the app thing there, what we're going to do is we're just going to replace it with the my app element. Okay, and we have to import that element. Import // components / app. Okay. Oh, let's see. Maybe I should export. Okay. This dot shadow root dot inner HTML. That should be showing up. Okay, let's take a look at the console. Reference error. Must call super constructor. Oh, I forgot to call super. I was even thinking about that too. Okay. There we go. Hello world. Okay, so essentially again the constructor. If you're not familiar with JavaScript classes, go get familiar with JavaScript classes first. I do have a JavaScript, several OOP videos on JavaScript, and several videos on web components, where I go into all this in a lot more depth. But the idea is I have to call the parent constructor since I'm extending an existing class. I'm attaching a shadow DOM, which kind of gives the component its own little mini DOM. So then I have to use the shadow root to access it, not document, but shadow root. So I'm accessing that particular component's little mini DOM. And I'm just giving it hello world for now. So I'm going to use this as the kind of boilerplate for the other components. So the other components I want are a display component, so display.js, and paste that in there. Only difference is that now this is going to become display, and the tag, and again, the reason why it's like my display, my app, is because the way the native web component API works is that it has to be kebab cased. So that's just a requirement because they want to make sure that you don't collide with existing HTML elements. So display, okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to import those components here. So import import ./display. Okay, and then I'm also going to want to do the same thing for form.js, except this will be form. And see, they all have the state accessible, so that's all fine and good. And form, and this is going to be my form. And then I will import this as well. Import ./form. Cool. And then so essentially what I want to do now is change this to a div here in app. Put an H1 that says Alex's to-dos. Alex's to-dos. Okay, and let's get rid of this double H1 here. H1, Alex's to-do app. And then we're going to have the display component here. So my display. And we're going to have, here we'll have this, well, let's just see here, if state dot let me think about that. Because then I'm going to have to re-render that. So let's do this. In the constructor, we're going to add a property to state. So I'm going to say state dot show form. Let me think about how I want to trigger this. Dot render form. It should probably be after the fact. So what I'm going to do here is I'll do this. Div. And this div will have a ID of form. Because I'm trying to avoid going through this typical like sort of render function pattern. ID form. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I want to have a method. Okay. And we're just going to call this render. Okay, well, I guess we'll just do like a render form function here. Okay, and essentially what this is going to do is just basically return the following. So if state.showForm is true, and again, right now I've just broken encapsulation. My class is referring to something outside of the class, which means like I'm doing some anti-pattern type stuff here, but it's fine. Just wanted to kind of do this like kind of, it's not as terse as possible and having to create like a whole base class and figure out encapsulation when I've already done libraries that do that, which we'll do separate videos on. State.showForm, if it's true, then what I want to do is I want to return my form. Okay. Otherwise, I want to return nothing. Okay. And essentially what we're going to return here is... Actually, no. Let's not do it that way. We're going to say this dot shadow root dot query selector. I'm going to select the div with the ID of form. And then we're going to sit there and say set that thing's inner HTML equals actually we just should do it this way. No return anything. And then this should be where we say equals is where we do the state dot show form. So if it's state form true, it'll equal this. If not, it'll equal that. Okay, cool. So that's all fine and good. And essentially what this will do is it'll run here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to state and I'm going to create a function called update. Or I'm going to create a array called updates. So updates equals an array with at least, well, maybe nothing in it. Okay. So essentially my plan with this array, which I kind of like where this is going, is essentially this is going to be a global state object. So among all my components, there's this state object. But instead of like setting it up where like I re-render the whole component every time, kind of like React, what I'm going to do is I have each component just have functions that anything that needs to be updated based on state will have those functions. I'm going to register them in this array. And essentially whenever I do need to update the DOM, I'm going to have a function here called update on state that will then, okay, function, and this function will then just do for f or I can just do this dot updates for each, this dot updates for each, and then for each function inside that array, it will just re-invoke the function. Okay, so it'll say F. Okay. And then that way, yeah, all the components can just register their function with that array. Okay, and then we'll create a function to like push into that array, I guess. I guess it's not really that necessary. It's exposed. Okay, so that is there. So let's go back to our display component. Or actually our form, where was I app? An app. So essentially I want this to update every time. So what I'm going to do is just say in state dot updates, I will just push an arrow function that calls this dot render form. Okay, and the reason why I'm doing that is because if I just push this dot render form in there, there's that whole issue with this. So to make sure I keep the lexical context that this is referring to app, I'm gonna wrap it in an arrow function. So that way, like, because the arrow function doesn't have its own like lexical context. Okay, so this is again the same kind of issue we've been running with classes in several of these videos. But that'll handle that. Okay, so that way anytime I want to update it, we'll do that. Okay. Okay, why? Because I want to make it where there is a function called the toggle the form. So let's see if we can get that. First, let's get the form visible. So in that case, what I want in app, I want there to be a button. Okay, right over here to create to-dos. Button create to-dos. And then we're gonna add an event listener to that button. So we'll say like this dot shadow root dot query selector, and then we're gonna select the only button that's there. And I want to add an event listener to it. And just say, hey, whenever that button is clicked, what I want to happen is I want the state dot show form to equal not the state dot show form. So I'm going to toggle it. And then I want state dot update to run, so we can then run those update functions. So theoretically, if that all works the way I planned it, I should be able to hit this create to-dos button, and we'll see another hello world pop up because that's the form component. Yes. Yes. Okay, that might seem a little like a lot to do something so simple, but it's going to get more straightforward as we go forward, now that I kind of set the pieces in place. Okay. And the beauty of this is that now going forward, I can just kind of like update the state and hit the state update function. And I'm not necessarily, again, re-rendering the whole components. I'm only deciding like sort of what specific functions render some stateful logic in there and do some stateful UI updates. And then those functions will run all at the same time whenever I run that update function. Okay, but it's only things that are related to state, not the entire UI. Okay. So that's pretty cool. Okay. Now, what I do want to happen is that I want us to update the to-dos when the component first loads. So web components, they have a function, a method that you can define called connected callback. And what that does, it's going to run when the component mounts. And I'm going to use this as an excuse. Make this async. I'm going to use this as an excuse to go get the to-dos. So state dot get to-dos, and then which will reset everything, and then state dot update, because we're probably going to want to update the display component. not a function. Okay, looks like I made a mistake in my state here. Response.json. Oh, I didn't put in a wait here. That's why. There we go. That does it. Okay. Goody. Okay. So, nice. So now let's go do the display component. And in the display component, all I really wanted to do is, let me think about this. We're just going to say no to-dos here in this h1. Let's actually put this h1 in a main tag. And then h1, no to-dos at the moment. Okay, and then we're going to create a method to render the to-dos. Render to-dos. And render to-dos, what happens is that it is going to const to-dos equals state dot to-dos dot map. And so for each to-do, what it should do is return a string. Okay, a string, which will be a div. And then what's going to happen is that each one, we're going to say const, in each div, there should be an h3 that's going to contain the to-do dot reminder and the to-do, and then we just do the hell to-do dot completed, and then if it's that, we say if it's true, we have an O, and if it's false, we'll have an X. We'll just do that whole deal again. Okay. Still shouldn't be visible, so don't worry about that. Okay, so that's going to be in there, and then I want to join that array, because again, the array is an array of strings, in which are separated by commas, so I really just want it to be one big string of HTML. And then what happens right afterwards, we're going to say this dot shadow root dot query selector. We will select that main tag that we rendered over here, and I'm going to say the inner HTML of that is going to end up equaling to-dos. Okay, and then I'm going to register state dot updates dot push an arrow function that calls render to-dos. Okay. Okay, so basically, so one thing I'm going to want to do is maybe just do another state.update after get to-dos. Okay, let's just do it this way. Await get to-dos, wait for that to finish. And then await this. Does that mean that when I start up? Yeah, there we go. So that way get to-dos is done, and then update will run. Okay. And then that way it does that. Good. And then I can create the form. Nice. Okay. So next we want to just create the form. So in this case, we're going to have a div. Inside that div, there's going to be a form element. And in that, okay, in that form element, there's going to be an input of type equals text. and an input of type equals checkbox, and an input of type equals submit. Let's just see if we see that. Nice. Cool. Okay, so our form shows up. So really what then I would want is to have a function that happen when that form submits. So let's create a handle submit function. Okay, which will receive the event. And again, we're going to have an event.prevent default, of course. Okay, and then what I want to happen is I want this dot shadow root dot query selector. We want to grab all these input elements. So I want to grab the input of type equals text dot value. I want to grab this value property. Okay. Okay, so we're going to say const reminder equals this. Then we want to do that another time. So completed. Slash shadow root equals this dot value. And that's actually going to be checked. The checked property, checked, and that's going to be for the one that is a checkbox. And then it's going to say const to do equals reminder completed. So that way we have like the object from our form, and then we'll just do the whole if depending on the action. So if state.action equals create. Okay. Equals create. Then what's going to happen is we'll do state.handle create and pass in the to do. Okay, we haven't created this function yet, but we will. And then if state.action equals update, then what we will do is we're going to add an ID property to the to-do. So to-do.underscore-ID will equal state.underscore-ID. How does that property get populated? We'll see in a bit. And then do state.handle update to do. Okay, so essentially that'll be the flow. So still a couple more things I want to do, because at the onset, when this form initially gets constructed, I do want to make sure that these will initially start off where the state says they'll start. So after we define the initial inner HTML, I'm going to want to kind of copy these real quick. Control C. Except I want to get rid of this part and this part. Okay, and then instead of dot value, what I want to do is add an event. That value is going to equal state dot reminder. Okay, and then this will equal state dot completed. Okay, and then of course we want to add the event listener to form. So this dot shadow root dot query selector. This time I want on the form element, and I'm going to add an event listener to it, which happens on submit of the form, and that's going to be an arrow function that receives the event, and then runs this dot handle submit, because again, binding handle submit, and passes the event to handle submit. Okay, that should do it. So the form should be all set. Okay, again, I can do this. That is all good. And see the form, like the component's being removed, so I don't have to do any updates here because every time it remounts, it's running the constructor again. So in that case, this is good. This does the trick. Okay, so what I do need to do is this define the handle create method. Okay, so let's define all of these. Handle create. So handle create is going to equal an async function, which is going to receive a to do. Okay, so it'll be await fetch this.url, but then again plus the ID, because again RESTful conventions, so slash todo.id. Okay, and then we gotta pass in that object with all the settings. So that's gonna be method post headers content type application JSON body equals JSON dot stringify the to do. Okay, then that should create it, and then we just do this dot get to dos. We call that, which then resets everything. Okay, I think that should be good. So let's see here. If I create a to do, and we'll just say eat more food, I hit submit. Okay, let's see here. State.handle update. Error. Where? Let's say handle update. Oh, yeah. Oh, because we haven't created that yet. But why would it try to run that? State.action should not be updated, so it shouldn't have tried to run that. Interesting. State.action. Oh, here's why. Boop. Okay, let's try this again. Eat more food. I hit submit. Localhost. Oh, I think I made the URL wrong. So it's back to state. 10,000, that's right. Localhost 10,000. To-dos undefined. Oh, because it's post. My bad. I wrote it for update. My brain's just starting to get to the point of shut from doing these over and over again. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna copy this first, because a lot of what I need there for handle updates there. Make this handle update, and just change this to put. And now that's pretty much all good for that. And then for this, I just need to get rid of that. Okay, and while I'm here, I might as well do handle delete. And again, I'm just following RESTful conventions. So if you haven't seen me build the API to know what the endpoints are, I recommend watching the video where I create the API first, so you can see like what API am I consuming. And again, all links to all the videos are in the video description. So this is gonna be handle delete. And for this, I just need to change this to a delete method. and I don't need any of this. Okay, so technically I got all my methods all set. Okay, and notice, like, instead of putting them all in the components, I kind of have them all in this like centralized state mechanism, which I like. I like this setup. I am heavily debating trying to create a class that works this way, making that something that's available in one of my libraries, because this is kind of turning out kind of cool. Let's see here. Render to-dos. What was it? Oh, actually, no, this should be working. So let's see here. Create to-dos. Eat more food. Okay, I think that made the API call just fine. So let's find out. To-dos. Okay, I think this was the post one, yeah. So it made it just fine. Okay. So yeah, so it did get the data, it just didn't, the update didn't trigger, right? So let me just go back to where we have reset to do. So get the to-dos, this dot reset. Oh, but I never called this dot update at the end of the reset function. So let's do that. This dot update. There we go. So if I do this more food, eat cheese, and there we go. You can see basically what's happening is that once I'm done making the post request, it calls get to-dos, which then fetches an updated list of to-dos, which then resets the state, and then after, when it's done resetting the state, it then triggers the update, running all the different update functions. Okay, cool. Now we just need to make it where I can click one of those, and it gives me what I need. So just think about that, because we render that here. And let's see here. How do I want to do that? Because we are rendering the to-dos as strings, and I want them to have a function. Okay, so we'll have to do it this way. Fun times. Here's what we're going to do. This dot, so each div is going to get an ID that equals, okay, its ID. Okay, so to do dot underscore ID. Okay, and then what's going to happen is that after we do this, I have to get the whole list of to-dos to add an event listener to them. Okay, so this dot shadow root dot query selector all. This kind of makes you appreciate, like, you know, things like React and Vue and how quickly they make certain things. This is, we're making decent time on this one though. Definitely faster than I've done some of the other ones. Okay, I'll create a selector all, and what is going to happen? So is there any other divs in this particular component? No, it should just be those. So I just want all the divs. And then what I'm going to do is just add an event listener to each div. So for, okay, and this can get a little messy as we for div of divs. Although I need to actually save that in a variable called divs. So const divs equals, that should be all the divs. And then for each div, what I want to do is say div dot add event listener. And then when that div is clicked, it's going to run a function. And let's think about this. First off, state it's going to, we need, I want to get the to do, so const to do is going to equal state dot to do. So I'm going to have to do a find dot find, and then what I want to do is find the to do where div dot id, so the id equals the t dot underscore id, although I don't think it's like a I think that should work. Because IDs should be coming in as a string. So t.div.id, t.id. So find me the one with the matching ID. So then I can do this. State.reminder equals to do.reminder. Because what I want you to do is be able to click on one, and then that's going to open up the form for updating, and you'll be able to edit that one. So to do.reminder becomes that. State.completed equals to do.completed. Okay, state.underscore ID becomes to do.id. And state.action becomes update. And then once all that is done, then we will update the things. We'll do a call to state.update. Okay, so let's refresh. Let's just see here. So if I click on eat more food, the form should appear with eat more food in it. And I should be able to update it. Why? Because of all these changes that happen here. Because what's happening is that it's rendering all of the divs here. Then it's going back and getting those divs and adding an event listener one by one to them. So let's see. If I click on eat cheese. Okay, that doesn't seem to be doing what I was hoping it would be doing. So the question is, let's see what it says. Div is not defined. Or div of divs. Okay. Or div of divs. And what am I calling render to do's? Render to do's for div of divs. Okay, so it's saying div is not defined, but wait. Let's just do this as a for each. Divs dot for each div I'll cut this piece out. Put that in here. I think I don't need that anymore. There we go. Save so that we can clean up my syntax a little bit. Thank you. And it says div.addEventListener is not a function. Okay, so let's see. What am I finding when I do divs? Console.log divs. Okay, so see, it is making me finding the divs. So I'm looping over this array. So I should be able to add event listener, div. So let's just see, what am I getting when I, as a div here. Okay. And I am getting the node. And promise add event listener is not a function. Okay. Div.event, but it's already got the element. So por qué? So let's think about this. This.shadow root query selector all. We get all the divs and the divs. I'm saying div.event add event listener is not a function. It's not a function. Am I not calling it right? Div. Oh, because I didn't spell it right. Oh gosh. There we go. Now let's try it out. Click on eat dinner. Okay, still not quite doing what I wanted to do. The form did not appear. Okay. So let's get rid of these console logs. We don't need these anymore. Question is this event listener function running? And the only way for me to find out is put a console log in there. Console.log clicked. So let's see here. If I click on this, yeah, so the event listeners aren't necessarily registering. Did I add the event listener? Where did I add the event listener on? Each to do. Which technically, actually, I should probably do it to the H3s. So let's just change this to an H3, and that kind of will change everything. Let's see here. Supposedly that should be clickable. So let's walk through this. We are getting all the H3s, and for each div. Oh, I see what I did. Add event listener. I wanted to add click. Okay, on click. There we go. I said on div. There's no div event. Okay, so I hit eat more food. Cannot read property reminder of undefined. Read property reminder of undefined. Okay, so that means this did not succeed here. Let's see console.log to do. That's the next thing I need to check. Because basically it's saying to do that reminder doesn't work, so that means the find did not succeed. Undefined, yeah, so it's not getting the right to do. So what I'm going to do is break this down. And the goal should be to return this, but even before that I want to console log both those things. Console.log div.id and t._id, so we can see what the comparisons are. So if I hit X, okay. Can I read proper reminder, but seems to only be printing one. And that last one that's undefined, it's kind of odd, but TID. So let's see here. Let's do it this way. Div. And then say console.log T. And we'll actually just console log local object T. And let's see how that goes. So if I click on this, T ID, got it. The div ID property, the ID is not generating. So let's see here. Let's go in div my app. Inside of my app, we go inside app's shadow root. There is my display. So we have the shadow root of my display. Main. There's all the divs, and they do have an ID property. They do. So let's try this. What if I do this? Instead of doing div.id, I do div.getAttribute, and I just say, give me back the ID. Does that work better? You like this better? No. It doesn't get the ID. Now, why is that? It grabs the divs. Oh, because they're H3s now. So let me change this back to div. I just realized because I put the IDs on the divs. So eat cheese. Okay, that works a bit better. Okay. The div ID is that. This time I didn't get an error, but the form still did not appear. Okay. I'm getting the right to do now. Good. Oh, because I didn't change the show form. State dot show form equals update or equals true. See, it's just tracking all this state. So this is why it's nice to have things like, you know, the frameworks. It's a little bit easier. So I've kind of come up with a little bit of a system. Eat more food. Now let's see if I change this to eat more food too, and I hit submit. Will it work? Yes, and it gets rid of the form. Nice. Okay, so far so good. Okay. Then we need to kind of do the same thing for a delete button. So let me add a delete button. A button. Okay, and that button is going to have, oh, but the button's in the div. So the button should go below the div. Control C. That's not going to look pretty, but oh well, we're this close to the end, so. Button, delete. And again, we'll give this button the ID of the particular to-do. Okay, let me just save this so that we just kind of like formats it a little bit. And I'm essentially going to do the same thing as I did here. Okay. Yep, I don't want to do that in there. The only difference is that this is going to be the buttons. And this time it's going to be buttons. And then this time it's going to be for each button. I want to add an event listener on the button. That's a click event. Okay. That still gets the to-do. Okay. But what I wanted to do now is use state.handleDelete and pass in the to-do in question, which will then trigger the rest. Okay, so let's see if that works. If I delete eat more food too. Nope, div is not defined. Where did I use div again? Arrow, here. So this needs to become button. Okay. And it works. We can delete. I can edit. Haha. You did it again. Okay. And this is not too bad. Okay, so again, we kind of centralize our state in one object. Kind of like a Redux kind of style, but a little bit different. Kind of like having like a global view object kind of thing. I liked it though. I liked that pattern. It was kind of somewhere between sort of like Riot.js, just kind of like whatever. Again, all just kind of all done off the top of my head using what I know about the Web Components API and just whatnot. Again, I could have just the thing about the Web Component API is that it's pretty flexible and it's not like a framework. It's not like a way of doing it. That's why things like lit.html and Riot.js and Amponent and all these different like frameworks on top of it have come out, which kind of ruins the whole point of Web Components. The idea behind the Web Components API was like, hey, how about you be able to use components without having to use a framework like React or Vue? But it's so flexible that there's just, there's a lot of ways you can do it. So you end up with that same sort of like JavaScript issue where like 10 different people do it 10 different ways. So working on different projects still gets, you learn how to do it for that project, but then you have to kind of relearn when you move to another project. Instead of having a framework that kind of gives you a place to kind of gravitate to as you move from project to project. Although this was a lot of fun. I find doing stuff in like more raw JavaScript more fun because I can kind of come up with different ways of doing things. But that's not necessarily what you want to do when you're working on a production project. So have a great day. My name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcore.com. Do join the Slack and Discord community over there at devnursery.com. Follow me on Twitter and subscribe to me on YouTube. Have a great day.